So for those of you who can hear us now and are joining us, we're just going to give it a minute as participants are coming into the room, and we will start. We'll wait another minute or two just because I see that people are still joining us and coming in. So for everybody that's with us live, we will be starting momentarily. Okay, 60 seconds, and then we'll just start. Again, we still have people joining us, and we probably still will over the next few minutes, but we will start. We'll do a 60-second timer, and then we'll just go. Okay, I think that we will go ahead and get rolling. Again, people are continuing to join us. So exciting to see all the people joining us today. My name is Jeff Hoffman. I'm going to be the host for the day. I am a longtime serial entrepreneur myself, been involved in what we're talking about today, disrupting industries in the past, and I'm actually a customer of the death care and death tech industry. So this is something that's near and dear to me personally. I am absolutely thrilled for you guys, our listeners today, that you have a panel of 4 amazing innovators, 4 incredible women. They're going to tell you their stories about their company. We're going to talk today about not just the industry in specific, but also generally, what does it take to disrupt an industry, to take the old way and turn it into the new way? And we think this will be both inspiring and educational for so many of our listeners out here. So here's what I'm going to do. Instead of me doing the boring thing that moderators do of reading somebody's bio, we are going to ask each of our founders to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about yourselves. And then, you know what, let's do that first. Then we'll come back around to our first question. So Viv, why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your company so people who know who each of you are.
Yeah, of course. So I'm coming at you from Portland, Oregon, where we just moved this past fall. So it's been a lot of involvement in trying to figure out this new lifestyle. But I actually started off in New York, where I was born and raised. And so much of my own experience in the death care space came from my own personal experience. I lost my mom when I was 10 years old. And then when I was 21, I was both a caregiver to my grandmother, who was my own legal guardian, but at the same time also the person who made end of life decisions. And she ended up being the second really big loss in my life at a really pivotal point. I was a senior in college. I was thinking about what I was going to do for the future, and so much of it became clear in that with that loss, I knew that I wanted to do something that would impact other young adults who were also navigating a loss at a pivotal age, especially because I saw the discrepancy between being a kid who was grieving and being a young adult who was grieving. So that was where Too Damn Young was born. My own content and writing through Instagram, my own blog and personal essays was born from there too. And it's been a really, I think, instructive time of trying to figure out over the last 7 years how to constantly innovate and bring that conversation to the forefront in ways that matter to young adults and teenagers.
So starting Too Damn Young, you were starting something because you needed it and it didn't really exist, correct? You were trying to create the thing that you had.
100%, because there was a bunch of really awesome camps out there and different ways for teenage or young adults to meet other people in a really physical setting. And I was a shy kid. I hadn't met anyone as I was growing up without my mom that had also lost a parent. I definitely hadn't met a caregiver who at 21 was making end of life decisions for their grandparent. And I knew that the internet was going to be the way for me to find people, and also to give people permission to say, this is me too, without ever having to out themselves if that was their choice, right? Because they could consume the content without ever having to say it's me. But the reality is that when you see all these other different people saying that, you want to say it too, because you want to be a part of that community and make someone else feel less alone.
Fantastic. And we will come back to that. Liz, tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and why you chose to get into this space.
Absolutely. So I started working in the grief space in 2014. I'm a board member of a kids grief camp, and also worked in mental health tech. I lost my dad when I was young, so I've always been really deeply aware of the challenges around a loss, whether that be financially, logistically, emotionally, legally. And was also the caregiver, along with my mom, to my grandmother. So Viv and I have a lot of overlap and kind of what drew us here, what brought us here from personal experience. And I was also making end of life decisions for my grandmother, managing her funeral as a 20-something. And so I was inspired by that experience to create Lantern, which is a step-by-step guide to navigating life before and after a death.
Fantastic. A grief camp for kids. Are you still involved with that?
Yeah, I'm on the board there and have volunteered every year, except for unfortunately last year, which we went fully online, and was also an exceptional experience.
Just curious, has that continued to grow? Is that something people are becoming more aware of?
It is. We actually have been having a lot of conversations about how we bring camp to the masses, because of course camp inherently, as you have mentioned, is a smaller group of people in specific locations, has to be in person. And so we've been talking a lot about how we bring that magic and that experience to a broader network.
Fantastic. Thank you. Again, we'll come back to each of you. Joél?
Sure. My name is Joél Anthony. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also known as the Grave Woman, and I started the Grave Woman as an outlet when I was in mortuary school. I'm a licensed funeral director and embalmer, and I was just being overwhelmed by the experience of dealing with mortality and thinking about my own mortality. And through that process and starting my blog, I started getting questions from people all over the world about what death care was and what happened in the funeral home. So that led to a YouTube channel and social media presence where I just communicate with people around the world about death care. And I've been in the death care industry or around the death care industry all my life. I say it chose me. I didn't choose it.
Wow, that's a big choosing. There was that when you commented that people wonder what's happening in the death care industry. There was that obviously famous story of the crematorium that didn't cremate 300 people. That I remember that was one of the first times for a mass public consciousness that people said, "Wait a minute, I don't really even know what the death care process is." So as horrible as that event was, it made so many people wonder what happens to their loved ones. And I think it created an awareness that, was a big opening for the four of you in your businesses because people paid way more attention than they might have in the past. But thank you. Adelle, you're up. Tell us about you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Appreciate y'all coming. So my name is Adelle. I'm the founder CEO of Eterneva. And what we do is we celebrate really special people and pets when they pass by making real diamonds from the carbon in their ashes. And I actually ended up in death care, I would say, kind of accidentally, or I think, to what Joél was saying, sometimes it just chooses you. My co-founder Garrett and I, originally, we were starting a regular lab-grown diamond company. So we're just very interested in that technology, that application. And in a very separate side of my life, while I was starting that company, I had my very close friend and my business mentor get diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And shortly after she passed, her name is Tracy. And through looking, for me, Tracy's aunt and a couple of her friends, we were looking at what could we do to honor her and what are different options to do with ashes. It was just really, really surprising. That was my first foray into, kind of looking in death care and realizing, wow, there's really not been a lot of innovation here. And, we wanted something that was personal and meaningful. And I think just the takeaway was wow, we really lack meaningful ways to honor remarkable people. So that was actually the pivot point for Eterneva, was realizing there's carbon in Tracy's ashes. And if we could extract that, then I could create a real diamond for myself. And the amount of people around me that had gone through similar losses and said, I would do that in a heartbeat was just incredible. So that's what Eterneva became about. And this is Tracy's diamond. I wear her every day.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. And full disclosure, thank you to Adelle and Eterneva. I have a diamond of a loved one as well. So definitely understand the process, and through what all of you do, it makes a lot of us think about this more. Let's talk about how you, here's a question I want to put out, and I want you all to talk so that we can get some discussion. I may call on you to make sure everybody chimes in, but over the last few years, the culture of death care, what have you guys seen that's changed? For the traditional way we used to deal with loss and grief and burial and everything related to death care, what's changed in recent years and what's changed in the consumer? How has the customer changed, and how has the thought process changed that has enabled the four of you to create the businesses you have? So you guys can just kind of jump in. Liz, why don't you just start us off? But I love you guys. You guys are free to jump in when you want, because I think our audience would love to hear you discuss how this has changed and what caused you to get in this business for that reason.
Of course. You know, I'm going to take an example actually from my previous life, because I think we're kind of on the precipice of a big change in particular the grief space. I worked in the mental health space before this, an organization called Crisis Text Line. And at the time when we first started, I was the director of communications there. People really weren't talking about mental health in a public forum. And when I was first starting, the constant advice I was getting was, oh, no one's going to talk about this on social media. Don't even try to get people to share their experiences. This is not like a public discussion. So you're going to have to find other ways to communicate and to market this company. Now, of course, that seems ridiculous now, right? Like every major celebrity has talked about their mental health. It's a common discussion. There's hundreds of thousands of Instagram accounts about this. But at the time, it just seemed like this wild thought. And we're now getting to that phase, I think, with grief and loss as well. There are absolutely, you know, people like Viv who have been doing this for a while and have been talking about it and trying to push forward this conversation. But it's felt very quiet. People are a little more reserved about it. And I think with COVID, with, you know, a lot of the suicide epidemic, opioid, with the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the traumatic deaths that have happened there, people are starting to feel more open and more comfortable with discussing with trauma, with loss. And I think normalizing these discussions is hard, but it's so important. And there are so many different formats where we can do that. And so I wanted to make sure to kind of call this out. I recognize that there are people on this call that are from all different workplaces, environments, backgrounds, that you have an opportunity to make this discussion more normalized. If you're a healthcare provider, if you're in a classroom, if you're in an office space, if you're an influencer who maybe hasn't, you know, forayed into this topic. We actually just worked with a skincare influencer to talk about end of life. And we really found this incredible opportunity to have this amazing conversation with a group of people that might not have expected it, but really needed to hear it. So I just wanted to urge the group to really think about how they can normalize these conversations and make people feel safe to be able to have them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard conversation to start, right? Because even if I felt safe, a lot of people listening don't even know where to start the conversation. So I think that's a really, really important point there, Liz. Viv, what do you think? What are you seeing about the way the world has changed?
I mean, Liz kind of mentioned it too. I've been in the space, especially on the forward-facing side, right, where it's like very community-based and audience-based for the last 7 years. And I was one of very few who were talking about grief in an open way on Instagram 7 years ago. And I think that with COVID right now, we're coming at the precipice of talking not only just about grief as a general experience, but as a longevity of it, right? I'm at 18 years of having lost my mom. And I think that the nuances of what is that, not just for the person who had lost someone to COVID last year and is going through that 1 year anniversary, but what is that going to look like in 20 years? What is that going to look like in 30? And with the impact on the caregiver space too, right? I think that that's going to be a really relevant conversation as more and more people are moving away from the hospital setting for whatever COVID they were dealing with in that setting and going to long-term care and the people who are caregiving for them around them. And so I think when it comes to that general conversation, it is an openness, right? It is intersectional. It is realizing that I, as a person who is a writer, as an influencer, am living with the realities of all these other things also existing. and how do I continue to fold them more into that conversation? And I think more and more brands and businesses right now are trying to figure out, how do I do that in an organic way, and how do I do that in a way that still centers the reality of that, right? Because it isn't just a trendy thing, which I think is the other precipice of what we're falling down of, which is this idea of self-care and mental health and talking about these things as the trendy thing to do. And that's going to plateau very quickly, because it hit its peak and now it's going down. But now it's like, what do we do with this kind of plateau moment? How do we continue to elevate that conversation and make it something that's super relevant? And I think that, like Liz mentioned, we're at the precipice of that becoming something that's just at the forefront of everything. But it's also something that has to be considered. Jeff, you asked about camps, right? I think that camps are a really great example of how limited the environment and resource of someone who is grieving, I grew up in a low income neighborhood, in a neighborhood where camp wasn't even an idea for my family. It wasn't something they had ever thought about. And so now I think we're moving into this, how do we continue to make these resources way more universal and way more open to every single person, no matter their identity and lived experience, so that they too are getting the help. You know, when I started Too Damn Young, more than not, all of the people who are coming to Too Damn Young are white teenagers and white girls specifically, because a girl like me who's Latina is not thinking like this is something that's actually offered to her, which is why it's so important to put it at the forefront of mainstream, to make that connection that this is something that is available to you if you want it.
Hey, Joel, why don't you jump in on that as well? What audiences, because Viv made a point about, you know, a Latina community differing from a white community in terms of awareness of even these resources existing, or the cultural thought. By the way, guys, sometimes it's cultural. In some cultures, grief is poured out, and in some
Yeah.
cultures, they expect you to suffer quietly, just because it's historical, not because it's right. So, Joel, why don't you talk about that as well? How today's consumer and how they.
For sure. It on my end, traditionally, Black people have gone to Black funeral homes, white people have gone to white funeral homes, and Latinas and the Hispanic community have gone to their funeral homes. Now, with corporations, consumers are cross-populating funeral homes because of location, proximity, and services offered. So for us as professionals, we are now expected to be culturally diverse. We can't just know about our own cultures anymore. Particularly with death care education, white funeral directors now have to seek out how to take care of Black people's hair and skin, and the consumer is expecting white funeral professionals to know how to take care of us. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point that we'll continue to touch on, about the fact that for all of you, you have to make yourselves available to a multicultural audience and understand that we don't all deal with death and grief in the same way. Adelle, you and I have had long talks before about, you know, my own issue when I lost my father, but what I haven't told you is in the last year, my 12-year-old neighbor, a 12-year-old boy that was like a son to me, died of cancer. Then my best friend at 34 died of a heart failure. And then last week, we just lost a 28-year-old friend, apparently to a heart attack, and only 28. None of them COVID related. But I have to tell you, dealing with 3 people that died too damn young, all in a year. For a lot of people listening that are dealing with loss, I don't think they even know sort of what the entry point is, right? So I'd love for you to talk about, for people, again, where do they even start? What would they even be Googling? What would they be looking? How are they finding you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, my heart goes out to you, Jeff. And the reason that Jeff and I actually first got connected was when he shared the story of his closest friend. And I think he's really a model to many of us, and just continuing to talk about people after they're gone. That's just a change that I hope to see in our culture, you know, going forward, because there's beautiful people, and his friend's life touched me very, you know, personally. But, when it comes to how people find us, it kind of ties back to this idea of how culture is changing. I think Viv is absolutely right. There's a conversation that's happening on social media that we've never seen before, just an openness and a willingness to talk about hard topics. And, so we've really leaned into that, at Eterneva. A lot of what we do is we lead with storytelling. So it's not just talking about ourselves and how cool the ashes to diamonds process is. Like, the science behind it is pretty rad, but really what's more special, we believe, is that there's unbelievable stories behind every single one of these diamonds, and people that would just absolutely blow you away. And so we have a really incredible team here that does a lot of video storytelling, and we tell those people's stories. And on Instagram and on TikTok, our TikTok this last quarter was like just absolutely unbelievable. It went from 0 to 100,000 followers in, a couple months. We had a few videos get over it was like 6 million organic views with no paid behind it. And it was really came down to something like touching somebody on a personal level of saying, like, I've been through a similar experience by losing a parent. Like, this resonates with me and I want to share this. And so a lot of people find us by actually the word of mouth effect. They'll have a preteen see us on TikTok, and then they tell their mom or dad about it. They talk about it at the dinner table, and it's having that change in conversation that we're hoping to see. And then almost as a side effect, people are coming to us and saying, what are my other options other than what I'm just seeing in a normal funeral home? So that's how people are starting to find us.
That's excellent. And your point about storytelling is really important. Why? Because the way we keep our loss, the way we keep someone in our heart and soul forever is by remembering their story, right? So capturing the story of someone we loved is the way we share that person with ourselves and everybody else for eternity. But sometimes there's this sort of almost gap between technology and the human side of things. And you guys are innovators. Technology is how we innovate in industry. So Joél, you start with this one. To innovate in the death care industry specifically, what new technologies, we didn't have social media in the past, how do you see technology and innovation opportunities in this industry?
I think there's definitely the opportunity for more aftercare, which is something that all of these ladies have done a tremendous job at. And that's the time after the loss where we as individuals are having to deal with grief and the reality of the loss. And I think that there's a major opportunity for companies and death care service and product providers to tap into that market and build those communities through technology. Like you said, 10 years ago when I started in this industry, there wasn't really a YouTube, there wasn't a big social media presence, but now someone can get on their cell phone at 3 o'clock in the morning and have that sense of community. So I think there's definitely the opportunity to build around that.
That's an excellent point. And for those of you listening to us who are not in this industry, death care, whatever industry you're in, you should be using technology to create community around your company and your products as well. Liz, what's your thought on that? Opportunities for innovation in your industry, especially using technology?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest opportunities with using technology in this space, and really in any space, is thinking about how we make human needs more accessible, more affordable, more customizable. In the death care space for a long time, it's been sort of like a one size fits all experience. It's been really expensive. You've had to go to a physical location if you have access to it. By having technology in play, we're able to make things so even if you don't have a dollar to your name, you can go on Lantern, you can find everything you need to know and understand in order to navigate the end of life process, get connected to resources, to services that you need, to find people like Joél and Viv and Adelle through our services. And that's really what we see as the opportunity, right? Like what we've experienced for a long time is that we've been pushed into sort of this niche category where it's like, okay, this little group talks about this thing, and unless you're in some kind of urgent need, you don't even pay attention to it. And with technology, we've been able to shift to really being a more fundamental component of wellness. And not to say that we've totally accomplished that and we are now this core tenant, but we're getting there and we're making that process and starting to realize that dying well isn't afforded to everyone. but technology is allowing us to push forward and make that a more important component.
Excellent. Thank you, Viv. Obviously, just the fact that you became a blogger in the first place was an option we didn't have that many years ago. But how do you see it, the role of
Yeah.
technology to innovate?
I think that the points being made are really good. And what I would add to that is just, and Jeff, you've kind of mentioned this too, is you don't have to be in the deaf care space to innovate within it. And you don't have to, or to put that conversation at the forefront, right? I think that there are so many great influencers, bloggers, content creators, writers who are talking about lived experiences that involve death and grief in their own lives or their mental health, because those are just realities that we all live through. And doing it, mentioned to earlier, like this idea of a safe place and having that safe space to have these conversations, to create this content, all of that safe space, especially on the internet right now, equates to whatever space you own the most. Like, what space are you the most comfortable in? What space are you like really, that is your core tenet of like, I go on there to have fun as much as I do to create or to consume. And that's the place you want to start. Like, that's the place where the conversation is going to flow the most, because it's not going to feel like you're forcing it to check any boxes when it comes to grief or death care. It's just going to feel like you're having a conversation with whatever community you've built there. I think that's the ultimate way of continuing to innovate in the space, is centering it on community and making sure that whatever you are having that conversation, wherever you are, it's as organic as possible, because it is a sensitive topic, because the reality is that we don't have a language for it. We acquire it as we go along. And those are realities that we will never be able to outrun, because that's just the reality of grief and death care. So it's not about trying to outrun it. It's trying to meet people exactly where they are when we are in those places too.
So excellent points, especially about safe place and meeting people where they are. Adele mentioned TikTok, right? There's a lot of people, especially our younger customer, that is their home some days.
Exactly.
We all know they're on TikTok more hours a day than anything else. But the point is, they're comfortable being there, and meeting them there is a great place to talk to them and something they're comfortable with, instead of dragging them into an uncomfortable spot. Adele, I don't know if you're sitting in the sun or you're just glowing, but I'm going to go with the latter. Why don't you share your thoughts on this? On tech
it's a little bit of both for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think something that was really quite incredible that we saw in this last year with COVID, innovation was required of so many industries all over the world, and death care was certainly one of them. Without being able to have in-person funerals or services, a lot of our funeral homes had to innovate overnight, and they had to figure out how to provide an entire arrangement with a family virtually. So we saw a huge shift towards more Zoom conferences. But I think what we saw as a company was that there was more of the consumer kind of taking some of their own research into their own hands, and starting to look online for, okay, well, what are my options? What are different things that I could be doing to honor my loved one at a time that I can't gather, with my friends and family and community? And so something that we did at Eterneva was, we always knew the experience around the diamond creation process was really important and really special. We wanted to make it very transparent, hey, here's what's going on with your diamond. But we learned very quickly that people just valued the updates and valued having something positive to look forward to. So we've built out a whole technology experience around that. And now every update that they get to have is on a page where we're celebrating them, their loved one, and it allows for their friends and their family and their community, like we're talking about, to really rally around that person as their diamond's being made. And over an 8-month period of time, have a legacy project that everyone is participating in virtually. And I think that that's a huge insight that other businesses, in other industries can learn from what the death care space is doing, is that idea of community and is that idea of experience innovation through technology, because those are two things we really see consumers wanting more of.
So
That's a good point too, that I just want to add really quickly. It's just like, there's this opening right now. We're talking so much from like the business point of view of what are these openings for the business person to jump in on. But I think that the biggest one that's happening right now is actually within the family unit. It's this opening in the fact that the things that were traditional, because they were always done when someone passed away, by default of existing in this day and age, are being innovated, because there is no way to go back to the traditional, no matter if they wanted to or not. So given now they have this opportunity, it's this big empty space of choice that was never there before. And so that's where they're going to start figuring out what does it look like to put something else in there, and how does it feel, and reflect back on the traditions. We were talking a lot about culture. I think that, in the Latino culture, you pray for 9 nights after the person passes away. We did that over Zoom. From the beginning, when my mom passed away, never really understood it as much as from a religious point of view, but it felt even way more disconnected for me on Zoom. But it felt like it really elevated the nuance of what it was. This is some people who want to, because it gives them a reason to meet for 9 nights after someone died, and people don't want to be lonely. And so if you bring it down to the core of what it is, then that's where the opportunities for the businesses are. But I think it's not about trying to bring it up from here down here. It's trying to figure out what empty space exists down here and then filling that the best way.
That is extremely well said. Not only do people not want to be lonely anyway and deal with that loss, but then you added COVID on top of that. What opportunities has COVID created for all 4 of your businesses because of the fact that, as Viv said, we couldn't do this the traditional way anyway? How has that helped you guys move forward as industry disruptors? Whoever wants to jump in, just.
I'm happy to go. I mean, I think, certainly it's just brought it closer to home. We keep going back to this cultural point, but when we started Eterneva, back in 2017, even, we got a completely mixed reaction. Some people were like, wow, that's a beautiful idea. And other people like, that's really weird. And I don't know how I feel about it. And now, because of COVID, it's so much closer to home. We've all experienced loss in the last year. It's like 40% of Americans know somebody, that they've lost to COVID. And I think it's just creating this cultural awakening of, this is part of the human experience, and we are, more open to talking about it and embracing it. And so I'm encouraged more from our mission perspective, because we want to see that change happening. We want to give people, new and better options. And I think too, it's created a really strong partnership with the funeral industry, because, we don't really see ourselves as disruptors of the funeral industry, but rather partners to many of the funeral homes, and figuring out how to tailor their services and offerings in a way that really meet people where they are and provide that personalization and meaning that they're looking for. And so I think because of COVID, a lot of funeral homes can't offer what they traditionally offer, and they're looking for different ways to adapt what they do. And, it's allowed for the whole industry to start to innovate and modernize as a result.
This is
I want to
what
jump
you're
in and
saying.
say,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joél.
Go ahead, Joél.
I'm sorry, Liz. I just wanted to say, to Adelle's point, I agree 100%. As professionals, we're having to look for alternatives to celebrate the essence of who that individual was, without, like Vivian was saying, disrupting that tradition. And a company like yours gives us such a personalized option, where maybe we can't do anything with these person's cremated remains today. However, in 8 months, you can have a diamond. Or with companies like Celestis, where in a year you can send them into space. Just those alternatives, and having those alternatives takes a lot of pressure off of us, because it enables us to offer families something in that gap.
Yeah, I was just going to branch off of what Adele was saying also, and that when this really brings me back to when we were first fundraising. We're a venture-backed company, and we were fundraising for Lantern, and the arguments I was having to make around, why is this online? And, who young people aren't going to use this. They're not going to think about it. They don't care about it. It was sort of these constant conversations where I was having to say, hey, by 2025, there's going to be this shift in young people being the organizers, and they're going to be looking for virtual options. And we had no idea that less than a year later, suddenly virtual was going to be the only option. That was not expected or planned for within our company. And so all these predictions that I think we were all making for a long time suddenly jumped, 5-10 years earlier than we were expecting. And what I think has been really exceptional in all of this is a recognition around the importance of not just the conversation around end of life, but the actual planning for it has dramatically dropped in age. So While before it was like, okay, do you have a diagnosis? Are you, well into your retirement? Okay, now we'll start to talk about this. Instead, we're getting messages from people 18, 20, 25, 35 saying, I want to do something for myself. I want to prepare for my family. I want to honor and love my family by showing them that I've taken care of this process. I want to teach my parents, my grandparents how to do this. And so it's really just sort of opened the door to have these conversations early and often.
Excellent. So, what do you guys think? First of all, do you see your industry innovating around you, like the mortuary business, the funeral home business? Are they innovating on their own, or are more of the newer type of ventures like the four of you driving the innovation?
I can definitely say that the funeral industry and death care industry is innovating on its own. However, I don't believe if it weren't for COVID, it wouldn't be happening as fast.
Yeah,
Yeah, I completely agree.
definitely one of the, if you can use the word silver linings with things that COVID brought, it did force us to innovate in certain areas, and this is a good one. Go ahead, Adele.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to echo that experience of we certainly see, because we're a direct to consumer company, but then we've really partnered with a lot of funeral homes across the country, and there's some very, very innovative funeral homes. I think of Purchase down in Texas and Shettinger in Ohio, and then what we've really seen because of COVID is like it's that forced innovation. It really is kind of life or death sometimes for some of these funeral homes, because they're trying to figure out how do we adapt our offering to continue to be able to stay in business. It's ironic, they have a higher case volume than they've ever seen before, and yet they're trying to figure out how do we stay afloat. So there's certainly a lot of support that the funeral system needs, but I think it's going to be better for it.
By the
I think
way,
on
thank you,
yeah.
Prakash. That question came from our audience from Prakash. I grabbed it off there. Go ahead, Viv.
I think, I see it on the immediate side, right? Like Joel was saying, Adele too. But I don't see it as much yet on the mainstream side. I think that there's a lot of catch up that has to happen. I think that if we talk about, like, I'm more on the writing side as a content creator too, and like on the publishing side, I think there's still a lot of convincing to be done that there is an audience for this, because the reality is that the audience isn't the deaf care space. The audience is everyone who will lose someone down the road, who is either experiencing a first anniversary or an 18th anniversary. And I think that there was a question popped in the chat too of just like, how do you bring these grief conversations into like the mainstream? I think it's about just having them. And the more that you have them, the more that is proof of concept, because there are people in your comment section, there are people who are following you. There's just like this constant flow of people who are validating the fact that they too are seeing themselves in this experience. And I think that with death care, I always also want to add the fact that it's not just death care, it's life care, because you're caring for those who are actually going to pass away, but you're also caring for the people who are surviving them and the people who are going to be living with this for the rest of their life. And the touch points are needed, especially at the beginning, but will be needed throughout their entire life. And I think the more that we can fold that into the conversation, then it doesn't just become a really nuanced niche conversation of these four companies or these complete innovators. It's like, how's the wellness space doing it? How is the publishing industry doing it? How are we making sure that this is coming present in all kind of media that people are touching? Because those are the important touch points that everyone else is experiencing too. And that those people who aren't naturally Googling this will have an opportunity to feel less alone, because it's just folded into mainstream conversation a lot more.
You have a really good point about the fact, the life care part of that, the death care is way bigger than the person that passed. And I'm going to use a real example for me. I told you that my 12-year-old neighbor that was like a son to me died of cancer, and I don't know how to talk to his mother, who will never recover. What am I would like to be as supportive as I can, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do or not do. And I don't know I just have no idea what I'm supposed to do. So everybody, the impact is so much bigger than people think of in your industry. But I'm going to give you guys a kind of a hard question. Liz, we're going to start with you on this one. We have a lot of listeners who are not in your industry, but want to learn from you as industry innovators. What are things, so here's the question. What are some things that your industry, that in death tech and death care, what are some things that you guys are doing well, the four of you, that you could generalize so people listening to us that other industries could learn from. If you're not in this industry and you're listening to us right now, I want you guys to share what's working and the way you guys are doing things that other people could use in their industries. So Liz, why don't you start with that one?
Yeah, I think people outside of this industry might be a little shocked by what I'm about to say, but we've actually developed a community around this. So we talk to our competitors. I know my competitors. I know the founders. I talk to them regularly. I ask them questions. I ask them about certain partners they have and how it's working and how it's going. And they do the same for me. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine, having a direct conversation with any of my competitors about these things. But what we realize is that we cannot and will not grow this space if we operate in silos. It's just not going to happen. We're looking at a industry worth billions and a problem that impacts every person on the planet, yet people will not talk about it. They're not talking about it. And so if we're all operating on these individual planes and not discussing with each other, not supporting each other, not elevating this collective voice, we're going to stay in that corner and we're going to stay in that position. And so we actually have, and how this whole conversation came together, we have a Slack group called Death & Co. It has about 200 people that are involved in that Slack group, and we share support and applause for people's accomplishments. We share news, we share events, we ask each other questions, anything we're not certain of or want other people's point of view on. We share there, we talk to each other directly, develop partnerships. If there are people that are listening on here that are in this space, you can send me an email if you want to join the group. It is open. We're very welcome to it. It's liz@lantern.co, and I can send you an invite.
Thank you so much. By the way, it would probably be good if all of you, and maybe Melanie can type them. I don't know if our viewers can all see the chat, but if you want, you're all welcome to give your email address. Mine's super hard. It's jeff@jeffhoffman.com. Adelle, what is your thought on the same thing? Things you guys are doing well that other people can learn from in their industries.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to dovetail on what Liz was mentioning. Is I think that more than other industries, the level of community building within the death care space is pretty just remarkable to me. I come from tech, and coming over here, I think while what we're all doing is something that is quote disruptive or innovative is kind of a better word I like to use, because again, I don't see this as disrupting an existing space, but rather partnering with the ecosystem to provide what the consumer wants and, just modernizing that experience. So it's a very rise all boats mentality, and we're working together to just offer a better experience. Another area that I would say is quite amazing, and people probably wouldn't think of this, but it makes a lot of sense, is this industry is excellent when it comes to operational process and chain of custody protocols. You can imagine working with the love of somebody's life. There is no room for mistake, so the level of, just operational processes akin to, we hire from aerospace, and we borrow a lot of best practices from aerospace, but you look at some of the biggest players in the space, and it's truly remarkable, how they've built these systems, built these processes to ensure that it's just a perfect seamless experience. Our supply chain tech is powered by blockchain. We look for every opportunity to ensure excellence in our process, and then also bringing transparency to it. I think that that's perhaps a more millennial perspective, of those of us that are, younger in the space, knowing how important bringing science and transparency to the forefront are. But, we not only want to have a best in class process, we invite people down, come see it firsthand, be a part of the process. And I think that that's something that is going really well. 93% of our customers say that they love that and they want to come down and see it all firsthand. And, certainly I'd recommend to other operational based companies is just being more transparent with how everything works.
So let me hit on two of those, and I'd like our other two panelists to jump in on this same one, shared learnings. But though I thought those were both excellent. Transparency, just so everybody understands that this industry, transparency is so critical. And she also talked about sort of being really thorough, careful, and sensitive to the way that you're handling a customer. I mean, again, having experienced your process in particular, Adelle, what you said earlier, the way that you guys sent me updates, you actually made me feel like my father was there with you, right? Here's an update on Sydney and what's going on. Anyway, that's the way you made that process feel. Because for other industries, it's one thing if I get an email that says, we lost your shoes, we're shipping you another pair. But I'm pretty sure I don't want an email that says, no one can find your father, but we're still looking. So your industry has to set a new standard. Joél, same question. And then Viv, about things you guys are doing well that other industries can say, wow, that's impressive, we should learn.
Definitely. From my perspective, we're focused on educating the professionals that are interacting with the family on topics of racism in our industry, because it exists everywhere, as well as caring for individuals that do not look, worship, think, or grieve like you. So through continuing education courses, we're actually teaching the professionals that are interacting with the families that are having the experience of working with the consumers. So yeah.
That is absolutely an excellent point. As you said, we are in a moment in history now where that level of tolerance and sensitivity, whether, racial, ethnic, gender, whatever it is, we all need a lot of help with that. And like you said, you guys are dealing with people that are already on edge.
Yes.
So you have to even be more sensitive to handling people. So thank you. That was an excellent point. Viv, what do you think? Same question about things that you guys are doing well that other people, for example, a lot of the things you've done with Too Damn Young, what could people learn from that for what they do in their industry?
I think for me, it really kind of builds on what Adele was mentioning too when it comes to just being super transparent. And to that, I would add the word vulnerability, right? Just like being very vulnerable. So many of the people who are coming to Too Damn Young are coming on my Instagram and my writing are coming because I'm sharing my personal experience, right? And my personal experience is not the perfect example of grieving. It is in no shape or form this idea of me being an expert in the idea of grief and the experience of grief and time with grief. It is me being a 28-year-old who lost her mom when she was 10 and is trying to figure out what life looks like, right? And my honesty in saying that and saying when the days are hard and saying when the anniversaries hit harder than any other day. My mom's anniversary was this past January. That I was so open with the fact that like this shit is hard and it's 18 years and like whoever tells you that it's supposed to be super easy after year 2 is lying to you. I am not an expert, but I can share my experience, and that's the points of connection, right? That's the points of availability. Those are the openings with which someone else is able to relate to not the nuances of my things, but just see themselves reflected in that and say, you know what, it's hard for me too in a different way, but it's hard for me too. And that shared, it's hard, but I'm also doing it because I want to have a nice life, because I want to be able to talk about my grief so that it doesn't hold me back from laughing tomorrow, so that I can fold it into what my life wants to look like. That's always why I've done everything that I've built out with Too Damn Young or my own writing. It's just this idea, like, it's my opportunity to figure out what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, so that then I can still continue to build a really happy life. And I think that that's the overall what we're talking about here too, is just death care isn't death care for the sake of being this checklist item on your to do. It is because you want to continue to have these people in your lives. You want to continue to fold them into the happiness and the moments and not have it all be bittersweet all the time. And I think that as long as we're centering that thoroughness, that thoughtfulness in the conversation, that's where the true innovation happens.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Whoever said time heals all wounds didn't have one, because it doesn't heal the wound. The wound doesn't go away. We just build our lives around it, right?
And you learn more things about how to deal with it, but it isn't like it makes it go away.
Yeah, and the fact that people are trying to tell you to let that wound heal, that's just people that don't understand. We build around those things. We treasure those memories. But people sometimes lead you the wrong way. I want to go to this next question because very relevant to what Viv just said as well. You guys this has been a traditional market, right? Death care historically, and it's been one that's now seeing these new changes driven by COVID, but you guys were driving there anyway, just forced for some people by COVID. And in an industry that people don't love to talk about. So you guys have the same task that every founder of every startup does, which is educating a market on the fact that they need us and that my product or service is different, but you need it anyway. yours is even harder. So I'd like you guys to talk about educating a market. How do you do marketing when your topic is already sensitive? So I'd like to hear your guys' experiences with, Joél, why don't you start with this one? Just your experiences with how you guys have market what you do into a sensitive
For sure. I've used YouTube, honestly. YouTube has been amazing for me. And there are days when I get on there and I cry because I've buried a baby. And I had to have that conversation with the mom and it broke my heart. And I'm honest about that. I'm transparent and I'm vulnerable. And that encourages consumers to talk to me and share their stories with me. And then they ask questions and I'm honest with them because nobody wants to hear crap when it comes to their loved one. I'm just completely honest and open. And I think that every industry could use a little bit more of that from those that are servicing others.
Sorry, absolutely true. Viv, let's go back to you. I want all four of you to chime in on this one because I want to hear your thoughts on marketing and educating your market, especially when you have a sensitive topic.
I think everything Joel said was like 100%. That transparency makes a difference and makes the hard things not hard to talk about. You also don't have to, I think, say, this is a hard thing, we're about to talk about it. I think that that's the way that it is perceived that we should talk about grief because it holds the gravity of what we think grief needs to be or like death care needs to be. This is a hard thing, we are going to talk about it. No, this is life. Like, this is fun. We're going to talk about what it looks like to, for me specifically with the demo I'm talking about, it's like, we're going to talk about what it's like to date when you have to say, yeah, I don't have a mom to introduce you to because like turns out my mom died. Right. But we're going to figure out what mom jokes we can say in that conversation and like lessen the mood and stuff. Right. We're going to talk about like how this is actually human, because at the end of the day, that's like all it is. And the more that we can fold that into it, like the easier it becomes to market it, because it doesn't become marketing, right? It becomes like, how do we have this conversation? Because again, I am not the expert. So I'm coming in for as much advice as you can give me. And then that becomes just more of an honest flow of like, but at the same time, exactly to what Joel said, holding the hard for when it is hard and saying like, this shit sucks when I have to talk about stuff like this. And like, this is hard and this is difficult. And it's okay to also say that, but like, to also think about the sweetness of whatever the next thing is in the next moment, if that's what's honest to you in that process.
Before we go to Adele and Liz, I loved what you said about it's okay to actually be human and you don't have to accept that grief has to be this horrible thing that we have to be sad about all the time. You made the comment, I'd love, somebody jokingly saying, I'd love to introduce you to my mom, but she's not alive, right?
Yeah.
That changes the whole conversation. I'm going to tell you guys really quickly, this is about you, not me, but I got to share with you a quick story. There was I don't know, it's been 8 years ago now that my best friend at the time, I have dealt with a lot of loss, drowned in a freak accident in the Irish Sea. And we never found a body. We had the Navy, the Coast Guard helicopters searching for him. We never found him. And I guess the riptide got him. But I do this thing that I'm driving. I might be driving past a pond and I stop the car and I'm looking and everyone says, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking for my friend Michael. And they're like, in a pond? I said, he's floating out there somewhere. People are horrified that I do that. You know who would love this joke? Michael. He would think it was hysterical that for the rest of my life, I will check every body of water just in case he shows up. That is how I deal with it. And people expect me to be horribly sad and morbid about the loss, but I can't do that. So thank you for giving people permission to do that. But people think I'm nuts when I look for Michael in a puddle in a parking lot.
I want to add really quickly one story to that too, because I think it also shows, there's a question in the chat too about just how do we have these conversations in general with other people and stuff. And I think that allowing for that humor, you got to be the first one to do it if you're grieving and like folding that into the conversation. But my boyfriend has I use this example often when I'm doing panels and stuff, but he'll look up at the sky whenever I'm exasperating him and annoying him, and he'll just look up and be like, I don't know what you guys left me here with. When I referring to my mom and my grandmother. And it is the most beautiful thing ever, because to me, it's like we're folding them into our conversation. He can't meet them and engage with them, but that's him acknowledging listen, I don't know what this is, but you guys got to fix it from heaven. And it's the most thing. And I think that those are the moments that just allow for so much laughter and knowing that, you know, you get through the hard parts of grief and it is hard, but you're able to one day laugh again about it and then also still feel that yearning at the same time.
Guys, I absolutely love this. Giving people permission, right, to be human, to
Mhm.
grieve their way. You know, it's from Joél telling a mother that I cried about your baby, even though I didn't know her, to your friends, you feeling comfortable making the first joke about your mom. Adele, let's talk about it because this is all related to marketing in the sense that this is how we enter people into a conversation about this topic. What's your experience?
Yeah, oh my gosh, so many thoughts on this, but you know, it ties beautifully to what Viv was saying. We're right now a campaign that we're focused on at Eterneva, you know, this year is called The Little Things, because an insight we've learned from our customers is that it's the little things that bothered you the most about your loved one that you end up missing the most. And we always found in the videos that we were doing about our customers, like I love this boy, Austin Gray. He's from Texas here. We lost him at 19, and he was kind of the jokester of the high school. And so we were interviewing his principal, and she's like, Austin stuck a fork in an electrical socket and caused a whole blackout. And it's so funny, you know, and poignant when it's about a story that, you know, of somebody we lost so tragically, and you can laugh in that moment. And I think it's why it did so well and why it was shared so much. And, you know, just love what everybody's saying about, you know, that there is space for humor and brightness. I think that tone really matters. That's what we obsess about at Eterneva, is we really focus on being not tone deaf, but certainly allowing for some brightness and for some celebration, and, you know, continuing to talk about people and, you know, just a celebratory way. And I think there's kind of these speaking to your customer and your audience, somebody who's been through this, you know, they get this right away. Somebody who hasn't experienced a loss yet, there is a different, you know, message at sometimes they can be a little bit callous about death, that this is morbid, or, you know, something that they're just like, oh, weird, we don't want to talk about death. And so with folks like that, you know, and we found this even being on Shark Tank, you know, we're like, how do we position this to a nationwide audience? You know, we were one of the first times a death care company has been talked about at, you know, like on Shark Tank. And so we wanted to make the entire pitch about our customers and about humanizing them, you know, and talking about the mother that lost her son, because then it's not a joke to people anymore. You know, it brings it home and you go, gosh, I really could see myself doing something like this if I had to lose a kid, God forbid, you know? And so I think like that's a big piece of it too, is not having the cognitive dissonance that can sometimes occur around death, humanizing, bringing it close to home, but then keeping the tone, you know, kind of upbeat and lighthearted to where we can sit with it.
That is absolutely fantastic. I think you, I don't even know what the right words are, but I love the way that you guys are talking about this topic. I guess we said transparency earlier, but authenticity is part of transparency as well. Knowing what you're transparent about is coming from your heart. Authenticity is so critical in marketing to today's customers. And your guys' authenticity is absolutely fantastic. By the way, you guys can Google Adele's episode of Shark Tank, but you know, authenticity. Your mother, Viv, you know what? Your mother, it's the fact that life goes on, right? We do have to grieve, but life goes on. And if we were to ask your mother the one thing she'd want to see right now, she'd want to see Viv crushing her life, which is exactly what she's doing. You go on to be you and do what you do to honor that person. And everything you do, Viv, you're honoring her by your success. Liz, let's go to you. And by the way, quick question. We end at 2:15, is that correct? Adele?
Technically, we are supposed to end now.
Okay. I looked at the meeting invite. I'll tell you what, then let's do this instead to respect people's time. Let's go around. Liz, you go first, and I would love you guys to share your parting thoughts about building. Each of you has built a brand. You've built a company in this space. What advice can you give for any industry to people about launching a brand, innovating, you know, dealing with today's customers, dealing with new innovations in old industries? whatever you want to share. Let's each take a minute to wrap up. Liz, you go first. Parting thoughts to share with our audience.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing is understanding what your why is. And if anyone's in marketing, they know the Simon Sinek golden circles. If you haven't seen that video, it's a really helpful video. But really understanding not what your product is or even who's using it, but why you're doing it. Why do people care about it? Why does it stick with them? And really utilizing that as the core of your brand messaging, as the core of your marketing. I also think, and this actually kind of answers the last question we were talking about too, about educating a market, is not just thinking about how do you educate people about the product you're offering, right? Like I can talk about how we talk about Lantern on social media or in the press or whatever it is, but also how do you educate people about the larger why that you're dealing with? So that's part of your responsibility as a business. That's part of your responsibility in the space, is to educate the why. And an example of that, of something that Lantern's doing right now, and it's not live yet, so I'm sorry, I'm going to say the site, and it doesn't exist yet, but we're in the process of launching a site called reportingondeath.com. And the reason we created that is because we realized that a lot of the issues we have with communication around talking about death is that journalists and media aren't educated on how to talk about it. And so we hear these very common phrases and ways of discussing death and loss that actually hurt the people that are grieving. So an example of that, just really quickly, is around Kobe Bryant's death. At the 1-year anniversary, everyone kept saying Kobe Bryant's wife is still grieving. It's been 1 year. Why is still in that sentence? And we say that colloquially all the time. Oh, they're still grieving that. And then it suddenly enforces people who are grieving to feel like they should be on some kind of timeline, that they should be experiencing it in some kind of linear way. And so I think, just to wrap that up, I think it's just really important to think about, in your space, how can you be doing a service to educating people?
Excellent. Thank you very much. And somewhere in there, when you said you have a new innovation in death care, but it's not live, there was a joke in there. I just couldn't come up with it. Joél, you're up.
I believe strongly in alignment and doing things from a place of purpose and passion. So I encourage anyone in any industry out there to make sure that you're aligned with what you're doing and go from there. Because I didn't get into this to build a brand. This, like I said, it chose me. So I believe I'm aligned, which is why opportunities like this present themselves. So
there is no question about your alignment, young lady. I think everybody that knows you can see that. And thank you for bringing that gift to so many families. Viv?
I would just say, two things. One is just care about the people that you're trying to connect with. I think that so much of the conversation, all the nuances, all the hard days, all the heavy days, they can get away when you realize, at the end of the day, you're connecting with this one person who really used you, really, who 5 minutes after their grandparent died, found you. And that, caring about that one person makes a whole hell of a difference. And to that point, you just, as you to Joel's point, I didn't build this to build a brand. I built it because I needed it. And so don't disqualify the thing that you need. There's probably one more person who needs it too. And it doesn't have to be a business, especially in this death care space. If you're grieving someone and you just want to create something because you want to process that in a way that's very specific to you, it doesn't have to turn into something that is going to feed you every single day. But if it is what it is right now, that's good enough. And I think allowing ourselves to process in that way, it makes a difference.
Thank you very, very much. Adelle, first of all, excuse me. Thank you for making this happen, Adelle. We are here because you had an idea of bringing these 4 innovators together to share. So thank you and your team, Melanie, everybody at Eterneva, for putting this event together for us. But why don't you bring us home with your closing comments?
Yeah, thank you. And absolutely likewise. Thank you to Jeff, and thank you to all of the amazing panelists. We're so grateful to be coming together as we do, but getting to share that publicly. I think in closing, what innovation I believe is really about, and it dovetails on what Viv was saying, was just knowing who your customer is and how you can add more value. I think that's a question that we obsess about at Eterneva, is how can we add more value? And if you stay close enough to them. We have a tradition of whenever the diamond comes home, it's called the homecoming, and it's this really special day. If it's within a 10-hour drive, somebody in our team is getting in a car and we're hand delivering that diamond and meeting our customer in person and sitting in their home and getting to bear witness to them seeing their loved one's diamond for the first time and all the emotions that come around that. And, there's just so many insights that we've gathered from, just being so close with our customers, texts away. And it's really adapted how the experience we provided, how we talk about Eterneva, everything. And so I think that's really a core tenet of innovation, is just knowing so much about the people that you're serving and always being obsessed with making it better.
That is a phenomenal quote to close on. That relationship with your customer, especially in this industry. All four of you have shown how important having a passion for the customer really is. It isn't a business to you guys. Like in the same way Joél said that this industry is her, I think it's pretty clear for all of you that you're pouring your heart and soul into this. And in any business, in any industry, your customer can feel that. If you're there because you want to be there, and a customer is not an annoyance, but a relationship, your business will do well. Thank you, ladies, for spending this time with us. Thank you for everybody who joined us and listening. The recording is available, and all of you that have suffered a loss, we feel you. We're all here with you, and we're all here for you. Thank you very much, and everybody have a wonderful day.